All right, this is gonna be my first impressions video of Stormlight Archive, book number 5, Wind and Truth. And we are out here sort of just taking a walk around some park areas to do this thing. My camera is my phone right now, so I'm just gonna occasionally flip back and forth. But that was quite a wild ride, honestly. This is, again, just first impressions, so I need some time to let everything sink in because it was a lot. It was definitely a lot. I listened to the audiobook version and basically have had very little sleep, I guess, since the book came out just, I think, 3 days ago, right about 3 or 4 days ago. So I kind of just listened to it over the weekend. So that was a really, really fast sort of intake of the book. So I'm sure I missed a lot of details because audiobook version, when listening to audiobooks in general, it's very easy for it to just keep going while you somewhat lose attention. I try my best to rewind whenever I do that, but that's just the context for this review because I do want to give some context before giving my first impressions because, again, I need some time to process it. But overall, I really the ending was something I really enjoyed going through. I think a lot of the beginning of the book, I'm just going to get into spoilers right away because I don't really do non-spoiler stuff or reviews or anything like that. So definitely the big points of Kaladin becoming a herald and Dalinar dying, that was unexpected for me. Him breaking everything and just, becoming honor, giving it up, and then tempting Taravangian to let go of the shard or to grab the shard of honor and become retribution, all of that stuff. Very unexpected, and I'm very glad it turned out that way and that it wasn't this weird, or not weird, but wasn't obvious. Because I feel there were certain things that were a bit more obvious, that were a bit more expected. But I'm very glad that the ending, it felt satisfying, basically. It wasn't just unexpected, and I don't like it just because it's unexpected, but I like it because I feel like it's a good ending for this first arc. Especially for Kaladin's story. I feel like him becoming a herald and trying his best to help the planet and help Roshar and also help the heralds in the best way he can definitely fits his character and is a good ending to his story. His story was personally my favorite, and I believe I'm going to try to get through this first impressions thing by talking about the characters one by one, because definitely a big part of this whole story for Stormlight is the characters. And for Kaladin, he's one of my favorites. The whole Bridge 4 stuff, his interactions with everyone, his story, and we get to see a conclusion to that. And that was one of the main things that I really liked about this book is his journey with Szeth. Szeth was basically one of the first characters we got introduced to for this book, or for this series. He killed Gavlar, and I always thought he was a very interesting character whenever we got a point of view chapter from him. I think starting from Oathbringer, the third book, whenever it was his point of view, I just was all in. I enjoyed all those chapters, when he was training to become oh my gosh, there's so many terms flying in my head right now that I'm blanking on the order that is associated with high friends. Why am I blanking right now? Okay, I'll get back to that later. But his story aligned with Kaladin, those two coming together was a very, very unexpected thing that happened in the last book, at the very ending when Dalinar told Kaladin he had to go with Szeth to Shinovar. So that was a very, very nice setup already, because we're putting two characters that are so interesting and have such an interesting backstory. So I guess we'll talk about Szeth right now too, talk about them together because they were basically together this whole book. And his backstory was definitely very fun to go through. I mean, very painful for him, but it was interesting, and it sort of tied it together to why he became an assassin in the first place and how he ended up following this oath stone and why he has so much sort of trauma and instability, being unable to know what's right and to know what to do. And then his journey ending with breaking or reaching the 5th ideal, and then Skybreakers, there you go. I knew it would come back to me eventually, but sometimes when you're talking about it and you've consumed so much information, things get lost. But when he reached the 5th ideal for Skybreakers and skipped the 4th ideal, that was a really, really fun moment in the book. Even the characters were questioning whether or not that was possible. But it was crazy and fun that he ended up, immediately renouncing it right afterwards, because he made that realization that like just because he says the oath doesn't mean he wants to be a part of that system. Like just because he realizes that he is the law and he gets to make the choices and he lives those choices doesn't mean that he has to be a part of a Skybreaker order that he doesn't agree with. So I thought that was a very beautiful turn of events, definitely unexpected. Although I will say it kind of made the scene with Dalinar renouncing his oaths like to be a little less impactful, just because it kind of happened like back to back. So definitely something that I enjoyed in that ending. Like the ending was definitely, like the ending was jam-packed with a lot of things basically. And I feel like for Szeth's story in particular, we are not going to see, like this isn't the end of him. He's still alive. He said that he would bury Kaladin's body. And he's probably holding one of the most dangerous weapons, which now considers him a friend in the whole Cosmere, which I'm very glad about because I don't want it to be the end of him. But I'd say for Szeth, his whole story is very satisfying to see, to finally like learn about and know how he basically became a warrior due to Ishar's craziness and him being influenced by Odium's power and everything and trying to play God. I personally thought that was a good story, and the whole reveal of it being in Ishar the whole time instead of an unmade definitely made it more impactful, I think, because it was just another added twist that I felt made it better, because why would everyone follow an unmade was a big mystery throughout that whole story arc, and it being Ishar made a whole lot of sense instead of it being an unmade. Although I will say, I'm not sure if the whole like experimentations with Sprens and stuff sort of paid off. I thought that was a big mystery at the end of the last book, but it wasn't really that big of a thing in this one, I feel. But I might have missed something, so I'm not sure. But I'd say one of my favorite parts about this book was his journey with Kaladin, Szeth and Kaladin, just going through the monasteries, trying their best to help the people of Shinovar, and Kaladin getting through to Szeth in the end. How he used a lot of his experiences in his past with Rock's Stew, Bridge 4 stuff, and helping them and using those experiences to help Szeth and the Heralds. I thought that was a beautiful way to close off Kaladin's story for this era. And you know, part of it is like, you hear a lot of stuff about mental health these days, and you hear a lot of stuff about therapy and all that stuff. But so I feel like there is that risk to write a story about it, or at least make it seem like a good story where it's not preaching to you about mental health and stuff like that. That's a really, really strong ability, I feel like, to do as an author. And I feel like Brandon Sanderson does it quite well. Like, to not make it sound preachy and to make it grounded and make it feel like it's a real conversation that isn't like the characters preaching the author's beliefs or something like that. So I appreciated that the story and the characters approached it from that perspective, where it did feel grounded and it felt like the characters were really experiencing it versus like having such a simple answer. I feel like a lot of the books are really like philosophical in many ways, like asking questions about life and trying to figure out the answers in life, like problems that plague a lot of people, just general problems that people have and trying to figure out solutions to them. So I really appreciate that aspect of the book. For now, that's what I got to say about Kaladin and Szeth. If there were one thing that I wish there was more of, is Kaladin's interactions with Bridge 4. We got it in the beginning of the book when he was saying goodbye, and he did make a promise with Adolin and Shallan that they would have drinks together eventually, which I feel like he still can fulfill that promise as long as Shallan and Adolin survive, which they seem to be, you know, they have their own story threads. So we can talk about those story threads right now. Adolin, one of my favorite characters of all time. For a while, I was really wishing he would become a Radiant to get his own like spren, make some bonds, get some powers. But the whole thing from the last book with him and Maya, and seeing that he's forming this new bond and creating this sort of new magic system almost in a way with the spren, I thought that was interesting as well. Like, I thought it was going to eventually come to something like that, but like the way that they did it, I did not predict, and I didn't expect that he would be able to talk to the armor in that way, and him just being him, making friends and making connections, like genuine connections. That to me resonated a lot, because for me, I personally really like that. I want to try to do that in my own life, is create genuine connections and friendships and everything like that, and just trying to be a good person. Like, I feel like Adolin's character is what I strive to be, and I feel so that's why he's one of my favorite characters. So I was kind of disappointed in the last book because I feel like he didn't really get to do much other than help Shallan. So I was glad that he kind of got his time to shine in this book, where we see him as like almost alone, because he's with a whole cast of characters that we're usually not with. So like in the first book, he's with Dalinar the whole time, so it's mainly Dalinar's story. And then the second book, I really enjoyed his interactions with Kaladin and Shallan. Like, I thought whenever those three were on the page together, it was just so fun. And that's when he started to become like more of like a character that I really enjoyed. And then in the third book, that's when, Alucard died, and he was definitely a prominent figure in that one as well, a main character. But then again, the fourth book is one I just feel like I didn't get much of him, or I just didn't feel like much happened, or much happened with interest, like that story with them in Shadesmar. Like, there were some elements that were really cool, like the trial and everything. Like, that was a big moment for him, obviously. But I just feel like the stuff with the Ghostbloods kind of outshined it a bit. Maybe not outshined it, but played more of an important role in that whole story. And it just felt like Adolin wasn't as much of a main character in the previous book. So in this book, whenever I was reading about him, I really enjoyed it. And the stuff in Aesir was definitely the most interesting out of all the battles. Like, I feel like for Sigzil's chapters with the Shattered Plains and Yasina's deal with, or argument and stuff with Queen Fen, like that stuff was not, well, we'll talk about it later, but I'll just say that Aesir was my favorite storyline, plotline out of those three. So overall, I think the moment that really stood out to me with Adolin's storyline was the moment when, he asked for help and the shard plate spren formed around him, and he basically from there beat up the fused leader. That was my favorite moment. And the stuff with Yonaghan as well was fun, like them playing towers together, the whole theme of towers being presented later at the end with Dalinar's decision. I thought that was well crafted and showed a lot of foreshadowing. But I will say, during the reading, like when Maya left and he was kind of just doing his own thing without her, I felt like there wasn't enough information to what Maya was doing. So I would feel kind of frustrated that, she left and it's kind of the last moment, and it's in some ways that's kind of predictable that she would come back in the last moment. So it was really up to, what was going to happen in the last moment. And I thought it was pretty fun that everyone got shards, basically, like shard plate and shard blades, thanks to Maya's reinforcements. Although a part of me is slightly confused to, I don't know, there were certain things that confused me, because, he said that even Radiance had trouble against certain fused, but I guess maybe these unbounded, unoathed spren and the dead eyes and their abilities with them made it easier to fight in certain ways. But I didn't mind it too much, and I enjoyed the story for what it was. I thought that the scene with Talon was pretty cool, but the whole fight kind of happened off screen, which was a bit of a disappointment, because it would have been so fun to have seen two heralds fight off some fused. But seeing the aftermath is cool too. Now that I mentioned that, I'm forgetting about the scene with Nael and Kaladin, like when Kaladin fought him with the flute, and it showed the significance of the flute and why Wit was always so mad at Kaladin for losing the flute, because he probably foresaw that moment and knew that Kaladin would need to practice and use it. So it kind of ties the whole story together with that flute, which I found really fun. But in some ways, I thought it was kind of a little silly that Kaladin beat him with the flute. I don't think I really minded it too much, but I just thought that the concept itself was kind of silly. I think the execution of it was pretty good. I felt satisfied that it happened, and the way they fought in the beginning, and how Kaladin realized, despite him being such a good fighter, he's not going to be able to beat Nael because he's a herald and has powers he doesn't understand. And still becoming the flute was really cool, I thought. Adolin also fighting the Thunderclass and losing a leg was a big thing. That being permanent was, or at least permanent for now, is like kind of cool in a way. Like, it's unfortunate, but with the shard plate that can form around his leg, it seems to not really hinder him too much for anything other than the fact that it happened, and it's like almost like a battle scar, basically. Like just a symbol to show that he's able to do some crazy stuff, even without him being like a Radiant. And I think that makes it like even cooler in a way. So for me, his story as one of my favorite characters like was satisfying for the most part. I think there were certain things that I feel could have been done like a little bit better. I know I'm just saying that as a reader, and for me, you know, I'm just consuming the story, but as my favorite character, I just feel like there were certain parts for that story overall that felt missing, I think. And it was probably his interactions with like Shallan and Kaladin, because like I said, from the previous books, I really enjoyed them. And him not getting to interact with other like main characters, kind of like I felt it. And I think that was it. Like, that was a piece that I wish I wish it wasn't like that, because it's kind of sad that he didn't get like a final moment with Dalinar, and that, you know, there isn't more interactions with him and the other characters. But I guess it's, you know, we're gonna get that more in the next stories. I highly doubt that Adolin isn't gonna be a part of it. Like, he has to be, otherwise I'm gonna be kind of mad and upset and sad. So that's Adolin's story. Let's just talk about something that I'm a bit more disappointed with, which is Yasena's story. So for Yasena's story, one of the reasons why I'm disappointed with it is because of what happened, obviously. Like, basically all she did in this final book for this era is just like sit around like and thinking, and then losing an argument to Taravangian Odium, and basically losing a member of the Alliance that way. Like, it felt so kind of anticlimactic in a way, and I did not like it at all. I sort of get that it can, like, obviously it happened, and, you know, the way the story is set up and how the characters are, like, I can see how that can happen, so I buy into it. But at the same time, it kind of makes the character of Yasena look incompetent, even though she is kind of up against like a god, even if he is a new god. But for me, like, Yasena was built up to be such a competent character. To see her sort of flail around like that and lose that argument was, I don't know, I didn't buy it, basically. I didn't like feel like it was executed well enough for me to be convinced that Queen Fen would actually like leave them for that argument. Like, to me, it felt like all she needed to do was not say anything. And then when Odium brought up the evidence or whatever to, you know, show that Yasena pinned an assassin against Elkar's wife, did other bad things, the famous scene with her and Shallan, like teaching her a lesson in the alleyways, that was a good scene. Like, that being brought up was definitely, I feel like, a slight Easter egg, but if I'm using that term correctly. But like, all of those things, when Odium brought them up, she could have just said like, you know, she did that because she thought she was right in the moment, and now she feels like wrong about it, like she's changed. But I get that Yasena can't lie, or she feels like compelled not to say something she doesn't believe in. But I do think that she has changed, and that as long as she shows that she really sees Queen Fen as a strong ally that she wants to like really keep and fight with against Odium, like, that should be enough, because she was already not going to do that. She was already like loyal and ready to keep that alliance with them. And it felt like she just fell apart and lost everything. It just felt like one of those characters in those movies that are so incompetent that they trip, they fall, and then they die. It's like, I think there was a character in World War Z where like they just opened the hatch, and then something was like maybe coming, it didn't come, but because of the way they held their gun, they accidentally fired and killed themselves. It felt like that. And to see Yasena being turned into a character like that, it just seemed so wrong. So I just disliked it. I know that's the whole point, like that Vangean is that smart and he's able to make Yasena do that to herself, but it just seemed kind of dumb. Like, I just didn't enjoy it. Like, even if that's the case, I just didn't enjoy that storyline, even if it is believable. It just made me feel like one of the coolest characters didn't do anything in the final book for this era. But I'm sure, or I hope that in the future books that she will be redeemed in some way, and she is kind of looking at how, her beliefs are duplicitous and how like there's two sides of her and how she wants to fix it in some ways. So I suppose that is character growth. I just didn't enjoy it. And let's get to Sigzil. So Sigzil is one of my, another character that I like. He's not my favorite, but after the Sunlit Man, this is definitely really big spoilers. If you haven't read the Sunlit Man, like skip ahead because this is a big spoiler for that book. Sigzil is the main character in that book. So getting to see it tied together was cool, but at the same time, like I have mixed feelings about this one because as much as I love Bridge 4, I feel like Bridge 4 without Kaladin is kind of not very strong. Like Kaladin pulls them together. Kaladin's the reason why they're interesting in the first place. Without Kaladin, like I feel like the characters can't really stand alone. Other than Lopin, actually. I find Lopin to be a very interesting character, and the Dawn Shard was a fun story. And the Sunlit Man is also, a great story as well. So those characters, they can stand alone, but for whatever reason in this book, like I felt like I didn't enjoy it as much when it was like their turn to shine, I guess. Because I guess in Sunlit Man, they have their whole story going on with their planet. It's like interesting, it's a different plot. And then when it comes to Lopin's story in Dawn Shard, again, it's like a different plot. It's like they're giving time to build up that plot and test these characters in new ways. But whenever it comes to the main Stormlight books, it just doesn't feel like that. They're giving time for the supporting characters. Like it feels like our tie to them and why we should care about them is mainly because of Kaladin, because we care about him and his experience with Bridge 4. I think, at least for me personally, it would have been nice to have seen more of like their backstories, like get to know the characters better before we actually feel that invested in them. So when Moash did what he did to Leighton, I just found it kind of silly. Like I get that Leighton is a character that's been there all the time, but like just because he's a named character that's been in Bridge 4 since the beginning, and he got helped by Kaladin and everything, he's been there, sure, but I don't feel a connection to him other than that. Like I kind of don't care that he died. Like Teft was different because he was a part of the story and he was like more of an active supporting character, I guess. And then for Moash, like him kind of coming in, like, we hate Moash. Moash is a character that seems irredeemable. Like why is he even doing what he's doing? Why did he even kill Teft? It just seems so like contrived, all of it. And I think this sort of makes it even more contrived because like, okay, him being a part of, like he was influenced by Odium and all that stuff. Like him turning against Kaladin because he wanted to kill Elhokar, all of that made sense until he was free and now he can think for himself and everything like that. But he still chooses to fight Kaladin, or not Kaladin in this book, but he just still chooses to fight Bridge 4 and all of them, even though he feels guilty about killing Teft and feels guilty. And we didn't get anything related to his story and how he's feeling and what he's thinking. He's just trying to kill like Bridge 4 members. And to me, like that happening with no explanation just feels so silly. Like it feels unsatisfying. It feels kind of like, it makes me frustrated because it's like, it just seems like this character is doing this for no reason at all. So I guess a part of me felt like that was a little bit cheap and I didn't really enjoy that aspect of how he was trying, he killed, like Moash killed Leighton and then now he was about to kill Sigzil. And that's how Sigzil, renounced his oaths and Spren and everything. And his Spren became a Deadeye, which leads us to, more of the background revealed to how he got there for Sunlit Man. So it makes sense. Like plot-wise, it's cool to see that. But the reason it happened, I can't get behind it. I just feel like it's kind of cheap. Like I need a little bit more when it comes to the Bridge 4 characters involving Moash. Like it just doesn't feel like anything without Kaladin there. So that's why for me, the whole story with Bridge 4 didn't quite land, but there was more story there at the Shattered Plains involving Venli. I think for that story, I enjoyed it for the most part, but like the whole contract thing was cleverly done, but I didn't have like that much interest in Venli's character to begin with. She's definitely starting to become more interesting over time, but overall, like I don't have that much connection to that character. So for that story, I was just like, okay, it's cool. Like I'm glad that they outmaneuvered Odium's team, but It just didn't feel like a story I cared about that much or felt very involved in. I said I would move forward, but I think I'll just keep filming this guy for the rest of the video. All right, so let's talk about, the biggest plot line, which is Dalinar's plot line. I guess technically Dalinar is now dead, even though Odium or Retribution has now taken a part of his soul, the soul that was his spren, I guess, that is the Blackthorn, due to the legends. But, main Dalinar that we know and love is now gone. And I thought overall, the story was, I'd say, good, thanks to the ending. But for whatever reason, I just didn't feel that much of a connection to the stories related to the spiritual realm. I thought it was interesting for sure. Like whenever we got to see the past and histories, like that playing out, I wanted to see more of it. And I thought that those parts were satisfying. To think about it, like most of it is like good when I think about it as a whole. But I think maybe when I was listening, like while I'm in midway, I don't know the ending yet, I'm like, where is this going? A lot of it feels kind of repetitive because some of it's information we already know as well. So I'm like, okay, please, like, I want to hear something new, So whenever it did get to new stuff, I enjoyed it. Interesting. We have a new bird now. But I think like a part of me felt like the whole spiritual realm thing involving Gav was very strange because like how did he age so much when everyone else like only experienced what they experienced over that 10 days? Like it just seemed kind of strange. I get that Odium affected the spiritual realm in a different way for him, but I don't know, I didn't like it, I guess. I just felt like bending the rules for one character to make that setup happen while like it's the same for every other character. Something about it felt cheap. So I personally didn't really like the fact that he was Odium's champion. There was actually some theories about it, so I found it kind of funny that it ended up being true. But once again, like I just did not like that aspect of it, and I guess that's why, as part of why I don't like the whole like spiritual realm story thing was because of so many like things that you don't really understand. So it gives too much like room to do whatever the hell you want. It's like, in some ways that's totally fine, you can get as creative as you want, but I think as an audience member, as a reader, it's like, there's a whole reason why we like magic systems and we like rules and how like things apply, and there's something about Brandon's books that he does so well with these things. So once we're introduced to something like this where the rules just seem so ambiguous, it just required, I guess, very careful explanations to how something like that could happen. And to me, like just saying that time works differently or time is weird there isn't enough. So I felt like it was kind of cheap. But I think that what happened with him actually like going through the stories that he did in the past and him like understanding honor at the end, taking the power, releasing it, the Stormfather is gone now, like all of that, and how, Wit explained it, how he explained it too, that all the shards have to like basically team up now against like a great power that has shown that they're clearly very dangerous. So it definitely shakes up the story and makes it more interesting for the whole Cosmere. So for me, the whole story is good overall, thanks to how it ended. So now we can talk about like the last character, which was Shallan. At least I think that's the last main storyline. I feel like Shallan's story was, obviously a lot of it was also in the spiritual realm. So, and a part of me, like I said already, doesn't enjoy the fact that it's so like wonky, it's so kind of like all over the place, anything can happen. But I did kind of like re-experience her wedding and got to see her mom again, and the whole like theory about Chanarach being her mother, like a herald is her mother. That was a good reveal. A part of me wishes that I didn't like look at fan theories, because I would have never thought that, and I thought it would have been even more fun to have gotten that reveal, just by reading it and experiencing it on my own. So I think in the future, I'm just not gonna look at like theory videos. I'm just gonna experience it, because I do feel like it can kind of kill some reveals, or at least make the experience a little bit less enjoyable. But I thought her interactions with her mother were like really good, and the character growth of Shallan was satisfying to see. Like I thought she was definitely falling apart the last book, so it's nice to see like a more stable version and a more confident version and her ending the way she did, especially talking to Kelsier at the end. And seeing Kelsier as well in the beginning with Gavilar. Like, Kelsier is definitely one of my favorite characters from Mistborn in general. So it's kind of cool that Shallan's character is still tied basically with the Ghostbloods, because she now has that Spren device that allows her to talk with them. So that definitely is exciting for the future. But yeah, like, her story with Mraize was also good. Like, I just thought it was a good ending for Shallan, just like finally stabilizing herself and now fighting, you know, for the things that she loves at the moment, like Adolin. All right, so that basically covers everything for now. I mean, like I said, this is just a first impressions video. I don't think I'm actually going to do a full-on review video. This is just because, you know, I don't have the time for it, but I did kind of spend a lot of my hours these past days on this story. It's definitely one of my favorite stories of all time. Like, hands down right now, Stormlight Archive is still my favorite book series of all time, favorite story of all time probably. It's not over yet. There are 5 more books, so we'll see how it fully ends, but I thought that was a good ending for Era 1. It definitely, you know, starts a whole wave of more interesting and different stories that can happen. And there's a lot of characters that we've grown to really care about and like, and we want to see more of what happens with them. Like, for instance, Lift. Like, Lift didn't get much of anything other than, you know, meeting Xyle, and now maybe they're master and student. So that should be interesting. But yeah, when you create a world like this, of course, there's going to be so many threads. And because the story's not over yet, we're going to always have those questions and desires to want those threads to, like, finally end. But it's a good ending for Dalinar. I really enjoyed that. And I feel like it's a good ending it's a good story arc for Kaladin and Shallan. So, yep, that is basically everything that I have right now. And I really enjoyed that story. Probably will think a lot about it moving forward. I think there was a line from Kaladin that mentioned how, like, you know, stories are very real to him and they really affect him in real life. Obviously, he's a fictional character, but, like, I do feel like in real life, stories are very important and they do affect you in your real life. So, and this story definitely has affected me a lot. So I want to, I guess, like, thank Brandon Sanderson for writing this story, and also just overall, like, appreciate it and show my appreciation for it, even though I do have some criticisms or some thoughts about, like, how certain things happened and all that stuff. Like, at the end of the day, I still love this story and very grateful to get to experience it. Okay, that's it. Catch you guys in the next one. Peace.